a lot of money being spent on campaigning. A lot of cash is flowing. Is there a way to track any of this? Is there a way to see how many transactions have actually been done? We don't know. None of this is audited. Assalamu alaikum ji. Welcome to All Things Money, to our first episode, and today we're going to talk about the flavor of the month, or flavor of the months, or hopefully something that actually gets done, and that is essentially the elections and how the election economy actually operates. Everyone around us can see a lot of campaigning happening. You've got candidates putting up billboards, putting up posters, tons of panaflex, tons of plastic being wasted, but a lot of money being spent on campaigning, a lot of money being spent on essentially getting candidature tickets from various parties, so on and so forth. So a lot of money is spent essentially during the whole campaigning process. But how much money is spent? No one really has a clue here because A, none of this is audited. Even if it's audited, only a very small portion of this is audited. B, it's largely cash-based operation, so a lot of cash is flowing. As we will discuss in our future episodes, cash is a major drag on the economy. We've got about 9 trillion of cash in the economy just sloshing around, and some of that is going to be used in the elections as well. So let's understand how election finance or campaign finance actually works. The Election Commission of Pakistan is very clear. The law is very clear. The law states that for a National Assembly seat, you can spend a maximum of 10 million rupees per candidate, and for a Provincial Assembly seat, you can spend about 4 million rupees per candidate. So that is the law, that is the cap, but the law exists. Is there anyone who's following the law? Is there a way to see whether a candidate has spent more than 10 million rupees? Is there a way to track any of this? Is there a way to see how many transactions have actually been done? We don't know that. So this is just the law that we're talking about. So if you look at the Election Commission data, we can see that around 17,800 candidates are essentially contesting the elections for about 1,021 seats, about 749 provincial seats and about 266 federal or National Assembly seats. So about 1,021 seats are essentially 17,800 candidates are contesting elections for. Now, if you look at the number that the ECP has given as maximum, ECP says that for a National Assembly seat, and a candidate can spend maximum of 10 million rupees, and for a Provincial Assembly seat, a candidate can spend a maximum of 4 million rupees. Looking further into the ECP data, breaking it down, we can see there are around 5,121 candidates who are contesting elections at the national level, and about 12,679 candidates who are contesting elections at the provincial level. Assuming that whatever limits that ECP has set, everyone just maxes it out. Obviously, some will be very low, some will spend much higher, but assuming that's the average, we get about a spending of 51 billion rupees, that is 5,121 candidates, multiplied by 10 million, that's the maximum spending. So 51 billion rupees being spent by National Assembly candidates, and about 50.7 billion rupees being spent by Provincial Assembly candidates, who are about 12,679 candidates, spending 4 million each on their campaigning. But as we know that a lot of these people would spend much higher, and a lot of these candidates may not spend anything at all, and they're just doing it for the sake of it. So using the limits set by ECP, we can roughly estimate that the candidates will be spending around at least 100 billion rupees on campaigning. That's a pretty big number, and that money will essentially spend, I would say, between 4 to 6 weeks till elections. You'll see a lot of activity on the panaflex front. You will see a lot of activity on the food front. You'll have candidates will open political offices, campaign offices, camps, so on and so forth. There'll be door-to-door campaigning. A lot of activity will be generated across the country. Now, how do we estimate a more realistic number? A paper exists that was conducted by a few academics in KP, and they looked at Union Council data. They covered Union Council elections, and according to their paper, it is estimated that around the candidates contesting those Union Council elections, they spent about 473 million rupees for elections in 54 union councils. Now, this just gives us a ballpark estimate. We can see that on average, one union council election costs around 8.8 million rupees for the candidates. Further breaking it down, if you look at the total number of union councils in the country, that's roughly in the range of 7,979. If we multiply that 8.8 million by 7,979, we get to a figure of roughly 70.2 billion rupees. Now that is another estimate that we can work with. So according to the ECP limits, maximum that the candidates can spend is 100 billion. According to Union Council estimates, according to the paper that was done in KP, again, the data sources are very limited. Each Union Council will have its own dynamics. Some spending in some will be very high, spending in some will be very low. But on average, they're saying around 70.2 billion rupees for all Union Councils. So here's another estimate. Now, let's look at anecdotal evidence. According to last elections, if we just talk to different candidates, whether they're from the Provincial Assembly or from the National Assembly, the top candidates have, I would say, there is anecdotal evidence that exists, which says that they spend anywhere in the range of 150 to 200 million rupees or 15 to 20 crore rupees on one seat of the National Assembly. While for the Provincial Assembly, the spending is in the range of 100 to 150 million per seat. That is about 10 to 15 crore rupees. So the actual numbers may be much higher than what is being mandated by the ECP. So if you look at these numbers and we assume that a candidate in the National Assembly, or one of the top two candidates in the National Assembly spend about 200 million rupees each, and the top two candidates in the Provincial Assembly spend about 100 million rupees each, ballpark estimate, then we get to a figure of roughly 250 to 260 billion rupees that is being spent by the top two candidates in every constituency. Obviously, there's a lot of limitation in terms of data. A lot of this is anecdotal data. A lot of this is just cash-driven transactions, so it's difficult to pinpoint it. But this is a sort of maximum that we can look at in terms of anecdotal evidence. So the minimum value we got somewhere in the range of 70 billion if you look at the Union Council data. If we look at the maximum mandated by ECP, that's in the range of around 100 billion rupees. And if we look at anecdotal evidence in terms of how much top two candidates, the top candidates for any constituency actually spend, that's in the range of around 250 to 260 billion rupees. So we see here that the range is fairly wide and it's difficult to actually constrain it or restrict it to any particular area. Another area of spending, essentially what is spent by the Election Commission of Pakistan. It is estimated or budgeted that the ECP will be spending around 50 billion rupees for conducting these elections. This will include setting up polling stations, security, food, staff salaries, so on and so forth. All of this will at least cost around 50 billion rupees, which will eventually lead to more successful elections. So essentially, the total spending on elections, if you look at the higher estimate, that was around 260 billion rupees being spent by candidates, add another 50 billion rupees that is being spent by ECP. So we're looking at 310 billion rupees. That is more than $1 billion. Or even if you're looking at the lowest possible estimate, that was like Union Council level, we're looking at somewhere around 130 to 140 billion rupees or roughly $500 million. So essentially, the election economy in Pakistan is leads to activity or productivity or output of roughly 500 million to $1 billion over till the time elections are held. So that is between 6 weeks to when elections are held. The economy, there is circulation of cash or movement of cash of around 500 million to more than $1 billion very easily. How can we get better estimates for this? It's difficult, and I'm sure no candidate is going to own up to how much they actually spent. Even if they own up to how much they actually spent, it is difficult to estimate or verify it because most of these transactions are cash. Going forward, maybe something can be done where a lot of these transactions can be done electronically, a lot of these transactions can be done digitally, but we are far behind in achieving any kind of, let's say, verification or audit on that front. However, with how cash is being phased out and how we are moving towards digital transactions, it is possible, if the intent is there, to actually capture how many transactions actually happen, how much spending is actually done by candidates, and more importantly, whether they are able to stay within the limits prescribed by the ECP or not. According to anecdotal evidence, if we talk major candidates, they spend way beyond what is mandated by the ECP, but obviously this is something no one's really going to own up to, but maybe the limits are too low. Maybe the limits that are set by ECP are too low considering the sheer scale and size of different constituency, which is spread up to like in certain cases 50 to 100 square kilometers. Obviously a lot of these things require money and a lot of spending is required. So maybe there needs to be a case for revision of election limits. Maybe there needs to be a case for ensuring that whatever money is spent is actually recorded, is actually audited and verified, rather than everything being done on cash. So this is a very short review of how the election economy operates in Pakistan. We estimate that the size is anywhere between $500 million to more than $1 billion, and in subsequent episodes we hope to further drill down on this number and get to a more accurate estimate for all of you guys. Thank you everyone, and this is it for this week.